in this video, but what I want to do is make sure we get through this particular information. So the first thing I want to talk to you guys about is filling in this graph paper that I left at your desk today. So today we're going to talk about how to fill in all the information it's going to take to describe the graph and to graph it. So the first thing you have to do is put the equation in the top part. So whatever problem you're working on, you're going to take and put the equation on there. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to take and fill in ABC. Now, this one is something we haven't talked about yet, but we're going to get into it. So the first thing you need to know about this is that anything with variable squared is your A. So that means -3 is my A. We do not have an X value. So since I don't have just X, that's going to be 0. And then the last one is going to be 1 for my X value. So now my ABC is filled out. So if you should have a binomial like this, you will know how to take care of it. Now, factors. This goes back into if you can factor the thing. And this is not going to be able to be graphed with factors. Not perfectly anyways. So what we can do is get the vertex and symmetry. So the first part with the vertex, we know that the vertex is going to be 0 and 1. We talked about this in class because we can look at this and say, okay, if I have x squared and it has a -3, we set it equal to 0. So -3x squared equals 0. You take the 3 over here and divide it, which is still going to give me 0. We know that the square root of 0 is still 0. So the x value is 0. The y value is going to be whatever is tacked on in the back, which is going to be a +1. So this right here is what your vertex is going to be for the first one that we have. Now, the second thing we're going to look at is going to be the 0 roots. So in other words, where is this going to go when we graph it? So the first thing I'm going to do is take and graph this and see where it falls out at. Let's see here. So the vertex y, by the way, is going to be where it crosses the y-axis. So skip this part here, and let's go down to actually graph it in the table like we talked about. Now we know the vertex is 0 and 1. So like we said before, you're going to put -1, -2, 1, and 2. Use the equation. So I'm going to raise this up a little bit so you guys can see the equation. So our equation is going to be the x value in. So -1 squared is 1. 1 times 3 is -3. -3 plus 1 is going to be -2. And like we talked about symmetry-wise, we know that that's going to be symmetrical there. So for the next part, we're going to talk about what the y value for the second one's going to be. So 2 squared is 4. 4 times 3 is -12. Plus 1 is going to be -11. So we know we're going to have to graph this one. It's opening down. So I'm going to give myself enough room to show it. So the first one, the x value is 0, the y is 1. So -1 and down 2, +1, down 2, over 2, and down 11. So there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Let me go back. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. So this right here is what our graph looks like. So now we can see where we're crossing the axis. So factoring it means, can I factor this and get a perfect factor? We have not been talking about the quadratic yet, so let's jump into the quadratic formula. So in this, you're going to learn about the quadratic formula, which is going to be -b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So this can take the place of factoring when we have something that will not factor. So I'm going to jump off this page real quick and put you on paper that we can actually fill this in with. So our equation is negative 3x squared plus 1. Hence the reason why I made this A and this C. So for our equation, we know that the B value is going to be 0. My equation that we need to remember is negative B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. The A, B's, and C's all relate to the equation. So I'm going to put 0 plus or minus. The square of 0 is still 0. Minus 4 times negative 3 times 1. All over 2 times negative 3. So I'm going to have plus or minus square root. This is going to be 12 times 1, which is 12, all over negative 6. So we are going to get a decimal amount. So in your calculators, you're going to round it to the nearest tenth. So when I put this in the calculator, I'm going to show you what it looks like. It's going to be square root 12 divided by negative 6. And I'm going to end up with negative 0.5. Actually, it's going to be negative 0.6. So if it's positive on the outside, then we're going to have one positive, one negative. So the other one has to be negative square root 12 divided by negative 6. And I'm going to get positive 0.6. So I have one negative and one positive for my answer. So that means on the axis, when we look at this, that means that I am crossing right about here where it's 0.6. I'm really close, but I'm not on 1. I'm about halfway through. So for our factors, it's negative 0.6 and positive 0.6. So those are also known as your roots or zeros. Your y-intercept, we know, is where we cross the y-axis, which is 1. So let's look at the second one. It has a better picture because of the fact that we have more there. So let's jump in and do the first step, which is going to be labeling A, B, and C. So A is 2, B is negative 10, and C is 13. If I'm going to do axis of symmetry, this one's where it's different. So this one came from 8.2 and this one came from 8.3. So here's the difference between the two. In this one, you have to use this formula over here to get your factors. So here we go. We are going to have 2x squared minus 10x plus 13. Sorry about the bad looking 3 there. So A, B, and C. So for B, it's going to be negative 10 plus or minus negative 10 squared minus 4 times A times 13. On the bottom is times 2 because it's going to be 2 times A. 2 negatives make a positive, so it's going to be 10. The bottom we know will be 4. Negative 10 squared is going to be 100. Minus, so we're going to have 8 times 13, which is 104. So here's where we get into a dilemma. Sometimes it's not possible for you to have something that works. So in this particular one, it's going to be 10 plus or minus. This radical is a negative 4 over 4. So the problem we have here is that you can't have a negative under the radical. So what this means is I hover above the x-intercept. So whenever this right here is negative, it is not going to touch the x-axis. So that means I have no vertical factors. So I have none. Now, going back, we have one other formula we have to talk about, negative b over 2a, which is going to look suspicious because it's basically the first part of the quadratic formula. So negative b over 2a will help get me my vertex. So I'm going to have negative 10 over 2 times 2. So I'm going to end up having 10 over 4, which reduces to 5 over 2. Now, fractions are not always pretty. So when I ask for vertexes, you are not always going to get a pretty vertex. So for the x-axis, it's going to end up being 2.5 for your x-axis vertice. Let's put this back in our equation. This is 2 over 1 times 5 over 2 squared minus 10 over 1 times 5 over 2 plus 13. The good news is that you can do some reduction here. So this is 2 over 1 times 25 over 4 minus, this is going to become 5 times 5, which is 25 plus 13. So this here will reduce. This will become 2. So I have 25 over 2. So 25 over 2 is basically going to be 12 and a half. So 12.5 minus 25 plus 13. Put that in your calculator. So 12.5 minus 25 plus 13. And you get positive 0.5. So that means the second one, if you had it in fractions, it would be a half. So let's put this into our paper here. So this is going to be positive 0.5. So your y vertice, that's where they're getting that vertices for those y's. Y-intercept is going to be, well, let's see where our y-intercept is. Let's graph this. Now that we have our vertices, it's not pretty, but we can get it. We are going up. So this is going to go up fast. So I'm going to go ahead and put it like this. And it's going to be 2.5 and 0.5. So I'm hovering right here. So here's 2.5 and 0.5. So let's pick multiples that work nice. So let's pick some whole numbers. Let's say we have 1. So if I put 1 and 0, and over here I put, let's see here, 3 and 4. So we're going to get some whole numbers, but they're going to grow fast, so it's going to make it kind of sloppy. So if we do this, what I end up with is 1 times 2 is 2 minus 10. So 2 minus 10 is negative 8. So I have negative 8 plus 13, which is going to give me 5. Good thing they're symmetrical, so we don't have to mess with it. So if I go over 1, I'm going to go up 5. There's 4, 5. Over 1, up. Yep. So it's going to be 3. Should be 4. I'm sorry, that should be 4, because if you put 3 in, it gives you a different answer. So if I do 4, 4 would be symmetrical. So if I put 0 in, which is 2.5 back, that'd be 2.5 forward, which would be 5. My fault, I didn't make them symmetrical like I thought I did. So if we go over 4, now we can go up to 5. Now let's put 0 in. You put 0 in, x is going to end up being, or y is end up being 13, because both the x values drop out. So we go over here, we go up 13, so it's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We go across over here, so that's 4, right there's 5. All right, so this right here is what we got. It's narrow compared to our regular one because of the 2. It is opening up, and it's true, we do not have any factors because we are hovering above the line. So this one is a little different. Let's try to pick one that's going to work nicer for us. Let's talk about Oh, let's look at one of these here. So let's put one of these on here. A new equation. Let's say we have, sorry, my page got bumped. So let's say I have y equals 4x squared plus 24x plus 13. Now there's some tricks you should know. Y-intercept is really easy. Put 0 in for the x, and automatically the only thing that doesn't cancel out is the last one. So we know that the y-intercept is 13. We know it's opening up because it's got a positive 4 on it. I also know that a is 4, b is 24, and c is 13. So we have some bigger factors. And to get our vertex, like I said, we're going to use negative b over 2a. So I'm going to have negative 24 over 2 times 4, which is going to be 8. So negative 24 over 8 is going to be giving me negative 3 for x. To get the y value, like I said, we already know it. It's going to be 13. I'm sorry, that isn't 13. My fault. That's 13. Put this back in. So I have 4 times negative 3 plus 24 times negative 3 plus 13. That's squared. So we have 36 minus 24 times 3 plus 13. So we get negative 23 for the y value on that. So this one is kind of ugly in the fact of how it behaves. So when we graph it, I don't obviously have enough, so we will do it by multiples of multiples of 2. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 23 is right there, and it's 23 and 3, negative 3. So we'll keep these 1 to 1. So we're right here. So now that we have our vertex, which is this guy here and this guy here, that's what we're going to have in the middle table. I'm going to try to keep it fairly small. So we know that if we do like negative 5 and negative 7, which will be negative 1 and positive 1, they should stay symmetrical. So let's get on to what our roots are going to be. We know we're opening up, so we know we're going to cross the x-axis. So let's go back to using our paper that we had, and let's do our negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a formula. So for the first one, we're going to have negative 24 plus or minus. Yes, you have to square 24. Minus 4 times 13 all over 2 times 4. So it is kind of ugly, but most of us just entering it into the calculator. So negative 24 plus or minus square root. 24 squared is going to be 576 minus 4 times 4 is 16 times 13 is going to give me 208 all over 8. So I'm going to take 576 and subtract 208 from it, and you're going to get negative 24 plus or minus square root 368. Now I know 368 is not a perfect decimal, and that's okay. So let's do one positive, one negative. Sorry about that. So square root 368, and you're going to get 19.2. So negative 24 plus 19.2 over 8, or negative 24 minus 19.2 over 8. If you're wondering why I have two different ones, remember the plus and minus here means I have two separate answers. Because you have two places you cross the x-axis. So put this in your calculator. Negative 24 minus 19.2, and then divide it by 8. So this is going to be negative 5.4. So this one's going to be the positive. So negative 24 plus 19.2 divided by 8. So I have negative 0.6. So for your factors, or zero roots, because that's what these are, you have negative 0.6 or negative 4.8. So that's why I cross the x-axis. That is where we're going to go through. All right, so now that we have those two things, now we're going to go and graph it. So let's fill in the rest of the information. So if I put 5 in for it, 5 squared is going to be 25. So 25 times 4 is 100. Negative 5 times 24. So minus 24 times 5. It's going to end up giving me negative 20 plus 13 is going to give me negative 7. So this jumps up to negative 7, which is quite a jump. If you're not for sure if that's right, go back and take a minute and check your answers. Because I know sometimes when you're working it, you have something slide off with your calculator and it doesn't work quite right. Let's put 1 in. So this one's really easy. So I'm going to use 1 opposed to negative 7 because they are supposed to be symmetrical. So if I have 1, then I'm going to have 4 plus 24 plus 13. This is going to be 41. That's a huge jump. I mean, huge. So we're just going to graph the first two because of that. So the first one is going to be this. The next one is going to be 1 and up to 7. So 2, 4, 6, 7. And this one over here is at, whoops, that's a 4. This one here is going to be at negative 5. So 3, 4, 5. And up here, same thing. So if you think about it, this thing's growing exponentially, like super fast. So just like we talked about the other day, this is considered a min. That is the minimum point. If it's growing up, that is the smallest point you can have. If I flip over, this is right here is called the maximum. It is the highest point it can be. So when we talk about a min and a max, that's what we're talking about. As you can see, the tables don't change, but how you approach it changes. So let's talk one more time about something. If you do not have the regular negative 3x squared plus 1 as what you're given, you cannot do this the same as this. So if I have like 3x squared minus 7x plus, let's say 4, this will not be treated the same. You will use negative b over 2a to get your vertex. You will use negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a to get your x values. So just to make sure we understand, let's go through it together. So for this one, remember a, b, c. So negative 7 over 2 times 3. So I have 7 over 6. It's ugly, but it happens. So I'm going to turn this into a decimal. 7 divided by 6 is 1.2. So I'm going to put that back in. I like to use fractions, but it's up to you if you want to or not. Okay, so if you do it this way, it's going to be 3 over 1 times 49 over 36 minus 49 over 6 plus 4 over 1, because eventually they're all going to have common denominators. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and do some cross canceling. This is going to become 12. So 49 over 12 minus, this is going to have 12 in the bottom, so you're going to have to take that times 2. So that becomes 98. Plus, if I want 12 on the bottom, I have to multiply 4 times 12. 4 times 12 is 48. Now I just combine like terms with 12 over as the denominator. So 48 minus 98 plus 48. So I get -2. Oh, clear. Sorry about that. 49 minus 98 plus 48. I get -1. So -112. So your vertice is going to be 7, 6, and -112. And it's not uncommon for the denominators to be multiples of each other. So the vertice was a little more challenging. It took a little more work. If you turn it into decimal, you're still going to get the same outcome roughly. With this one, it's a little easier because it's all decimal. So -7 plus or minus -7 squared, which will be a positive, minus 4 times 3 times 4, all over 2 times 3. So we have 7 plus or minus. This becomes 49 minus 16 times 3 is 48, all over 6. Well, the nice thing is this turns out beautifully because the square root is going to be 1. What is the square root of 1? Well, we know 1. So 7 plus 1 over 6, or 7 minus 1 over 6. So I'm looking at 8/6, which turns into 4/3, or 6 over 6, which turns into 1. So we have two very, very good answers. These two are where we cross the x-axis. That is what the x factor is talking about. So for this particular one, we have that. We know we are going up. So that means this point that we had right here, this is a minimum. So since we are going up, that means this is the bottom. So that means in this case, we have a minimum. All right, I'm going to stop the video here. I want you to begin working on 8.3.